getting those things out, and we get those things. And there's really too much for us to be thankful for. But we are very thankful. I mean, there is, But in thinking about presenting this, and I'm not trying to make any performance or anything, but I tried to imagine what it would be like if you did all those things and we never acknowledged our thanks. You know what I mean? I mean, how important is it really that people say thank you? Fairly? You ever have somebody, going to the door? I guess this is a chauvinistic thing, and then you hold the door open for them, and they rush on through, and they don't even acknowledge that you even breathe or whatever, and you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I did this, where's my thanks? But what if Cheryl and I never said thank you? What if we never said thank you, to each other? And here's a thought. What type of people don't say thanks? As if there's a type. And what about the possibility if people or someone said thank you and you knew that they weren't sincere? One of the things I'd never really noticed about Luke chapter 18, we always talk about the prayer of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And we always usually look and see one thing, and then we're done. But the Pharisee started out his prayer, and he stood up and prayed about him, and he says, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, like this tax collector. And so isn't the Pharisee being thankful? And he may or may not have said thank you, but it sure didn't accomplish much in his relationship with God, did it? And then there's the tax collector, and by the way, it's not recorded that he said thank you. But he said, Lord, have mercy on me, and went away justified. And so I think there's more than just actually saying the word that's important to God. But what if we forgot to say thank you when we were supposed to? What if someone did that? Those are my thoughts coming into today's lesson. I just thought it would be a great thing to end the year to be thankful. And I found some verses that, for whatever reason, they screamed out at me again. And this is different than my thankful Thanksgiving lesson, in case you think it's a repeat. But I know that God wants our Thanksgiving to be a lifestyle. There are people that know how to say thank you at the right time in the right place. But I'm just not sure if that's what God's looking for. And what if we only said thank you when we came here? And however hard it might be to figure this out exactly, but we shouldn't be thankful because we're commanded to. You see what I'm saying? I mean, if someone tells you ever have you more than one kids and they get into a sibling, argument or whatever, and you make them face each other and say, all right, say thank you. And they may say the words, but what are you really accomplishing if they say it just because they're supposed to? It's kind of like love. Oh, you go, love your sister, and get it over with, and, something. And so where's the real love? Where's the real thanks if we're forced to do that? And God knows that about us. And then there's the amount of fulfillment. And we all know that it's there, because as soon as we do something, or especially if we go out of our way to do something for someone, or maybe we didn't even have to, or maybe it really inconvenienced us and we went ahead and did it, and they knew that we went to the extra effort and they didn't say thank you. Then there's an aspect of fulfillment that's related with thank you too, because when you don't get it, then what do you think? Or what are the chances, if you have a measuring device in your head that, let's say right now, I've got an 80% chance when brother or sister so-and-so, when they need something, that I'll do that right away. And then after you do that and they don't say thank you, then the percentage meter kind of slides down. Well, now the next time they're down to 50%, and I'm not saying we all look at it that way, but I do know that there's an aspect of fulfillment that when we're due thanks, and we know that we should, thankfulness is something that it's part of the nature of God. There's nothing bad about that. But when we don't get it when we should, how do we respond? When we deserve thanks and we don't get it, But I keep looking at the scriptures, and I don't think that we're due any thanks. However nice it might be. And it's not that we're not really due it, because if we do something for someone and they say thanks, yeah, we can do things that are worthy of that or whatever. But in our relationship with God, I just don't even know if thanks even needs to be on our table after all that He has done and what He does for us. Ideally, if God chose to save us from ourselves and from the world while we were sinners, what does anybody owe us after God rescues us out of that? You know, what compares with all that He did that we think that all of a sudden, that when God saw us very, very clearly for what we were and what we really have to offer Him, and He chose to send His Son for us anyways, and then somehow, some way we accept that offer and leave the very next day and thinking that somebody owes us a thank you, it kind of reminds me a little bit of that parable of the unforgiving servant, where God forgives him of the 10,000 talents of debt over 150,000 years worth of wages. How much money did you make last year? Multiply it times 150,000 and have somebody say, well, I'm writing that off. You don't know that anymore. And then the next day you go out to someone who owes you a week's wage or a month's wage, and you have them thrown in jail. The story didn't turn out very well for that particular individual. But I think that there's a way that we can reevaluate thankfulness and maybe get more out of it for ourselves. Because God does want us to be fulfilled, granted. But when we want it on our terms, when we get our expectations out of whack, we almost always set ourselves up for failure. And when it comes to thank you, that's something that's an ingredient in our relationships with each other. And as soon as that gets broken, then our relationships get separated. And then all of a sudden, thank you is a pretty important thing in order for us to be able to get along with each other, you know? But if we can readjust the way that we think about thankfulness, I want to tell you some insight I got in a passage in Colossians chapter 2. And I'm going to read verses 10 through 13. I only have a few passages for you. I thought I'd try to get on your good side before we end the year, you know, as we're facing into the new year. So, here in Colossians, Paul writes, "And we pray this in order that you may live a life worthy of the Lord, and may please Him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and joyfully giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified you," listen to what he says, "to share in the inheritance of the saints in the kingdom of light. For He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." Paul is giving a context here of where he's praying for the Colossian church. And he's praying for them that in all these things that he hopes that God will give to them, that they'll end up with that, with endurance and patience, and that they'll joyfully be able to give thanks to God. But he tells them why they ought to give thanks to God. It's because God saved them. He rescued them from darkness. And no one else could do that. No one else has the power. And so if that's the recipe for thankfulness, and God chose to save me, then ideally, shouldn't that settle my thankfulness? When could I ever deserve what He did for me? When could I ever earn it? How long would I need to be a Christian before I didn't need to be thankful about that? You know what I mean? And yet, what I'm trying to get you to understand, in the direction that I'd like you to consider today, is if God has given us a reason to be thankful, doesn't that settle it? And to think that we would need to be thanked by someone else after God has thanked us so much. You know, in the passage about the servant, the servant who said, "I've done everything that I was told to. I'm an unworthy servant." There's something else in there that I thought was very interesting also. Aren't you glad that I go back and read passages again, you know, once in a while? But in Luke 17, I know you know how it ends. It says, so also when you've done everything you were told to do, you should say, we are unworthy servants, we've only done our duty. But see, in the beginning of the parable, Jesus says, suppose one of you had a servant who was plowing or looking after the sheep. Would he say to the servant when he comes into the field, well, come along now and sit down and eat? Or would he rather not say, prepare my supper and get yourself ready and wait on me while I eat and drink, and after that you may eat and drink? Jesus is describing a typical master-slave relationship. And everyone understood that. That's the way that it was supposed to work. Since we're the servants, we don't go home and dictate. We go home to the master and we do his bidding. And that's the relationship. Now verse 9. Would the master thank the servant because he did what he was told to? Would he? Would he need to? No, because it's the master-servant relationship. And so if I, as a servant to someone, really understand the nature that I don't need a thank you, I just do what I do because that's my role, then aren't we servants of God? And why is it that we get so sometimes wrapped up in this idea that if somebody doesn't say thank you, or if somebody doesn't acknowledge what we're doing, the effort that we're putting out for whatever we're doing or whatever, that we have this idea that we deserve to be treated better than that. We deserve to be appreciated better. We deserve thanks. And Jesus, I believe, is trying to remind us that servants serve because they're servants. And that's it. And that if you do get a thank you, rather than make that an expectation, you should mark that down as icing on the cake and say, wow, I got some frosting today. Isn't that awesome? But the fact that we think we need that, I think it throws the whole realm of being thankful out of the playing field. And I think it robs us of being thankful to God in the way that we should be, because we think that we deserve it or need it or somehow, some way, and God settled everything we needed to know about thankfulness on the cross when we said, Lord, have mercy on us, and we obeyed the gospel. You know what I mean? When we lose sight of that, man, it all gets all bundled up. Our thanks should be due only to the fact that God saved us. That should be almost the entire realm of our thanksgiving. Because on what day can we not appreciate that He saved us from darkness? You know, we're still one day away from that. But another aspect of Thanksgiving that I want you to consider is God never wanted us to make that a routine. You know, just, okay, let's get our Thanksgiving out of the way. Remember the passage in 1 Corinthians where it talks about people, they wanted to all speak in tongues at the same time. And some people wanted it to speak in tongues or pray in tongues or whatever. And Paul's saying that you're giving your thankfulness all right, but the other person is not understanding that. He's not being able to be edified because you're giving your thanks in a language and in the spirit that he doesn't understand. And so I had to go back and look at that, not in the light of speaking in tongues and understanding. I had to look at that in the light of thankfulness, because somebody is doing things on their own terms, and it was not enabling another person to be thankful. Isn't that interesting? That we should try to conduct ourselves in a way when we're here that people can automatically respond and be thankful for what we do, not because we demand it or deserve it, but because somehow, some way, Paul is telling us this should be part of what we do. That when so-and-so says something, or so-and-so does something, or when so-and-so, when you're hugging on your brother or sister, reminds you of how special you are or whatever, we should be able to leave here being even more thankful based on what Paul is saying about, you know, this idea in the 1 Corinthian letter. Proper thankfulness should produce edification. Next verse. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, real short, 3 verses. Number 1, be joyful always. Number 2, pray continually. Number 3, give thanks in all circumstances. For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Now, Paul is saying all three things are God's will for us. And we can go to other passages and find more, but I want to talk about the give thanks in all circumstances. Anybody thankful for anything that you received this last week? And you got a gift from someone and they were there and you say, wow, thank you for that. By the way, aren't I dressed well today? I'm very thankful that Cheryl got me some things that made me look nicer for you, at least on the outside. I have the sneaky suspicion, you like that? I have a sneaky suspicion that the better I look on the outside, the more it causes people to be concerned about it not matching the inside, you know. But I don't want to wear rags here either. But consider that Paul says, led by the Spirit, give thanks in all circumstances. I know that for the most part, well, I know the ones that didn't, you know, Sandra told me. But those that received something and were thankful, I know that you said thank you. But Paul is not saying give thanks when you get something. Paul is saying give thanks in all circumstances, because thanks was never intended to be something that you only give when you get. And sometimes God gives us a gift of persecution so that we'll glory Him and we can get glory from others. And sometimes God sends us trials because He wants to make our faith genuine. And we have a tendency, because these aren't on our list of things to want, is that when those things come, then we gather all around and feel sorry for each other and cry and fuss and whine. And Paul is saying very, very sincerely and very specifically here, thankfulness is designed to be something that is continuous. It is no matter what the circumstance, and it's something that's ongoing. Not that we pick and choose what we want to be thankful for. You know what I mean? It's a huge difference from how the world defines being thankful. And what about verse 16 in Ephesians? Paul says, I have not stopped giving thanks for you. Now, granted, I understand that Paul had to have conversations with different people, but what Paul is saying, that when I have time to pray, I pray for you, it was never intended to be something where we schedule. Prayer was always intended to be something that we became. And to pray and be thankful, that's what we do. We compartmentalize. We try not to, and we know we shouldn't, and we go ahead and do that. But thankfulness should never fall into that category. Two more thoughts. And this one applies a little bit to this morning. And by the way, Kevin, thank you for the song selection. It fits in well with the direction that we're trying to go. But in Colossians 3:17, Paul writes to us, and whatever you do, by the way, how much is whatever? Okay. Whatever you do, Paul says, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to the Father through Him. The do is not something, and the thanks is another thing. The do is an expression of our continual thanks to God. You can't separate the two. And by the way, how often is whatever? How much is that? So we got whatever you do, and we have always giving thanks. And there again, you would think that when you do something, especially if you do something for someone else, what should you get in return? Thank you. But Paul is saying, you do, and you give thanks. Always. Man, I'm not there. I'm thinking more of thanks the way the world does. I got my do, receive ratios way out of whack, according to the way the Scripture's defining this. Last but not least, the singing that we did this morning. We know the verse, but we usually look at this verse with rose-colored glasses. You know, we see what we want to see. But it clearly says, sing and make music in your heart to the Lord. And I hope we sing with our heart, because that's what He wants us to do. He knows we'll be fulfilled if we sing with our hearts. He knows that neither we nor He will be fulfilled if we don't sing with our hearts. And the goal is to sing with our hearts. We either do or we don't. But the emphasis there is to sing with our hearts. But he finishes the sentence by saying, always giving thanks to God the Father. And here again, we like to compartmentalize. We say, let's have a singing time, and then let's have a thank you time. And that's not what it says. It says, sing, make music in your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks. And so I was thinking, even before I did the lesson, and even before I came and sang any songs today, sometimes I think, most of the time it probably isn't productive, but I try to think once in a while. I was thinking, man, what is it that needs to happen so that I have an attitude of thankfulness before I even begin to sing? And there again, I start, evaluating and reevaluating, and I'm compartmentalizing again. Thinking that, well, if I do this first, then I'll be thankful, and then I can sing with thanks, and man, here's what I'm trying to say. If I was ever clear that God rescuing me out of the darkness should have settled my thankfulness 40 years ago, I just don't know if I'd have a problem singing with thanks. But what I will assure you is that we wouldn't be reminded of these passages if there was ever going to be a gimmick to where we wouldn't have a problem with thankfulness. We wouldn't need verses that say, be thankful, be thankful, be thankful. See what I mean? There's no automatic cure here. But ideally, isn't it what God deserves? And isn't it one of the things that should be something that identifies us? Not that we need to be thanked, not that we deserve to be thanked, not that we expect anyone to thank us, not especially with our brothers and sisters, that we would need them to be appreciated of us because they should understand more than anyone else that we're all here, and the only reason that we ever really need to be thankful is that God rescued us from darkness when He didn't need to and we didn't deserve it. I'd like to see that clearer next year. I'd like to think that if I saw that clearer, that I would automatically be more thankful. I would think that other things would fall into place too. So anyways, bottom line, I'm not going to give you a program. I'm not going to say, well, starting tomorrow do this and then this and then this and then this. I'm going to say, you know the condition of your heart. You know what God's trying to work on. You know the things that you expect and what you don't. You know the things that interfere with relationships with each other. And you know the way that God wants you to respond to His love. I just say, respond to Him in the way that's appropriate. And see what happens. See if He doesn't stay faithful to His promises and give you some kind of benefit for adjusting your attitude in a way that's more pleasing to Him. Food for thought. Okay, we got 60 more seconds and then I'll close. Yes, that's what I was waiting for. Thank you. That was good. However the Lord has spoken to your hearts through His word today, we just need to respond to Him while we stand and sing our invitation song.